They say soul food is fried chicken and sweet tea, but during the civil rights era, it was something else: survival.
A garbage hatch in the counter eliminates stooping and avoids repeated handling of garbage.
These meals were quiet weapons cooked in church basements, tiny kitchens, and safe houses served to the tired, the grieving, the brave.
Serving dishes and range utensils are close at hand.
Dr. King said, "Everybody can be great because everybody can serve." And behind every plate was someone serving strength.
Spread over biscuit dough, not quite to the edge.
Most of those dishes forgotten. But if you stay with me, you'll uncover 30 soul foods that helped fuel a movement and why they should have never been left behind. This is 30 forgotten soul foods that fueled the civil rights era. Let's remember them together. Philadelphia pepper pot soup. They called it the soup that won the war back in the Revolution. But by the time of the Civil Rights era, it had a new meaning in black kitchens. This was no ordinary stew. It started with cow tripe, the stomach tough and rubbery at first, but cooked long enough, it turned soft and rich. Cassava thickened it with peppers, onions, and herbs tossed in like memories. It was bold, it was bitter, it was ours. During the winter of '63, when marches ran cold and long, this soup warmed hands and hearts. Folks ate it from metal pots by church steps in North Philly. Next up, the birds that taught survival. Blackbird stew. Now this one. This was for folks who knew how to make a meal out of nothing. Blackbird stew was made from birds caught out in the fields, sometimes with slingshots, sometimes with traps made from string and sticks. They'd pluck the feathers, gut the birds, and drop them into a pot with onions, greens, and whatever roots they could find, add water, maybe a splash of vinegar, and let it simmer low till the meat fell off the bone. During the rural boycotts of '61, this stew was a lifeline, especially in places where folks were fired from jobs just for registering to vote. Wait until you see what they did with raccoons. Raccoon stew. Some folks today might turn their nose up, but back then, raccoon stew was a meal you didn't waste. Down in the Gulla communities and across the Mississippi Delta, folks would skin that raccoon clean, soak it in salt water overnight, then cook it slow with onions, peppers, maybe a touch of vinegar or tomato. The meat was dark, rich, a little greasy, but when it was done right, it slid right off the bone. During the winter of 1960, after the first wave of student sit-ins, many young folks came home bruised and hungry. Some had lost their scholarships, some lost their jobs. But when Grandma set a pot of raccoon stew on the stove, coming up when possums became precious. Baked possum with sweet potatoes, don't laugh. Back then, possum was country gold. If you caught one fat off the persimmons, you had dinner and a story. Folks would clean it real careful, rub it down with salt, sometimes parboil first, then roast it slow in the oven with sweet potatoes all around. The meat was greasy but tender, and them sweet potatoes soaked up every bit of that juicy fat, sticky, caramelized, and rich like molasses. During the harsh winter of '62 in Georgia, when SNCC organizers were sleeping on church floors and hiding from night riders, this dish was served hot by families who didn't have much, but gave everything. Next, poor man's ribs that fed rich spirits. Fried buffalo fish ribs. They called it poor man's ribs. But out in the Mississippi Delta, fried buffalo fish ribs were rich in flavor and pride. Buffalo fish ain't easy to clean, full of tiny bones and thick scales. But the folks who knew what they were doing could carve out the rib racks just right. They dredged them in cornmeal, fried them crisp in hot lard, and served them with hot sauce or mustard on the side. That crunch, it was music on your tongue. Coming up, turtle wisdom in a bowl. Freshwater turtle stew. Out by the bayous and creek beds, folks used to catch snapping turtles with baited lines or bare hands if they were bold. That meat was tough, full of muscle, but when stewed low with onion, garlic, and maybe a pinch of cayenne, it turned tender like beef. The broth came out dark and rich, sometimes with a little roux stirred in. Some added hard-boiled eggs or okra to stretch it. Turtle stew was slow food, the kind that made you wait, made you sit, made you remember. Next, squirrels that scrambled for freedom. Squirrel fricassee. Squirrel wasn't no stranger in black kitchens, especially out in the country. Boys go out at first light with a .22 rifle or a slingshot, come back with a sack full of squirrels ready to skin. Sometimes they fried them whole, crispy on the outside, juicy inside, but other times they'd make fricassee, brown the meat in a skillet, then simmer it in gravy with onions and carrots till it fell clean off the bone, serve it over rice or biscuits, and you had yourself a meal that could hush a hungry room. During the long organizing weeks of the Mississippi Freedom Summer in '64, food had to stretch. Squirrel dishes brought folks together. One elder told the story of feeding 14 volunteers with 6 squirrels and a whole lot of gravy. Coming up, rabbits that multiplied hope, rabbit and dumplings. Now, rabbit. That was Sunday best meat in hard times. Folks would set traps along the fence line or shoot one early in the morning, clean it by noon, and have it bubbling in a pot before the sun dipped low. They'd cook it slow in seasoned broth. Let the rabbit fall apart soft, then drop in hand-rolled dumplings, thick and doughy, soaking up every drop. It wasn't just warm, it was filling. A stick-to-your-ribs kind of love passed down from Big Mama's hands to yours. Back in '61, when student protests lit up Nashville, a church elder made rabbit and dumplings for every teen that got locked up and released. She served it out of a dented pot behind the pulpit, told them, "Y'all fighting out there? I'll feed you in here." Next, greens that grew dangerous. Poke salad. Poke salad wasn't picked from no store. It came straight from the earth, wild and dangerous. If you didn't know what you was doing, you could die. You had to boil it 2, sometimes 3 times to get the poison out. But once it was safe, seasoned up with bacon grease, garlic, and a little onion, it hit the soul like a hymn. Old folks said eating poke salad taught you patience. You had to treat it right, or it would turn on you. Kind of like the world outside. That bitter green taught you how to work with what you had, even when it didn't seem fair. During the voter registration drives in rural Alabama, poke salad showed up on more than a few dinner plates. It grew in backyards, beside ditches, behind shotgun houses, and for families who lost wages just for registering to vote, it was one of the few greens that didn't cost a dime. Coming up, cornbread that never failed. Hot water, cornbread. Ain't a soul who grew up in the South that don't remember hot water cornbread. Just cornmeal, salt, and boiling water, mixed till thick, shaped by hand, then fried in a cast-iron skillet till golden brown. Crispy outside, soft in the middle. It was the kind of bread that never needed butter to be good. These little cakes hit the table when there wasn't time or flour for biscuits. They cooked fast and filled you faster. And in homes where marches were being planned and leaflets printed by hand, hot water cornbread kept bellies quiet and spirits high. Back in 1968, after the Memphis sanitation strike and Dr. King's final speech, many households across the South served Johnny cakes in silence. Folks dipped them in beans, sopped up stew, or just ate them plain with a heavy heart. No words, just a taste of something that had always been there. Next, liquid gold from garbage, corn cob broth with onion skins. When the cupboard was near empty and every penny mattered, folks turned to things most people threw away. Corn cobs left bare after eating, onion skins too tough to chew. Boil them both slow, and you had yourself a broth, golden, sweet, and full of flavor. This soup base was a quiet trick passed down through generations, especially during the lean years before and during the civil rights struggle. Folks would use it to stretch beans, greens, or whatever scraps they had left, turning waste into warmth. In '66, during long nights of organizing in Arkansas, this broth bubbled in borrowed pots behind churches. It wasn't about pride, it was about purpose. A warm bowl passed between hands reminded everyone, we may not have much, but we make something out of nothing, and somehow, even without meat or money, that pot still carried dignity. Ash cake wrapped in collared leaves. Ash cakes were born straight from the ground. No pan, no oven, just hot ashes from the fire and a little faith. You took cornmeal, water, maybe a pinch of salt, and shaped it with your hands. Then you wrapped it in collared leaves and tucked it right into the embers. Let the heat do its slow work. When it came out, smoky, earthy, full of soul. Peel back them collard greens, and you had a bread that told stories without speaking. During the long protests in Georgia, when folks couldn't afford flour or sugar, ash cakes were the answer. Elders made them in the backyard while the young ones came back from sit-ins, tired, hungry, but proud. That bite of warm cornmeal soothed the nerves and filled the gaps between anger and hope. Roasted pig ear slabs. Now, pig ears might sound strange to some, but back then that was prized meat, cleaned real good, boiled till tender, then laid out flat and roasted slow until the edges crisped like bacon. Folks would slice them thick, drizzle on vinegar or hot sauce, and chew on that cartilage like it was candy. They were salty, savory, with just enough chew to make you work for it, but that texture, that flavor, it stayed with you. And in neighborhoods where supermarkets wouldn't sell decent cuts to black folks, we made the most of what others threw away and turned it into gold on a plate. One Sunday in Birmingham, a church fed 100 marchers after they walked miles in protest. All they had were pig ears and potatoes, but folks ate like it was a feast, laughed, passed plates, held hands, and for a moment even the police sirens outside couldn't shake the warmth inside. Kids would gnaw on those crispy edges, sauce running down their chins, and elders would smile, remembering harder times. Homemade Southern tea cakes, soft, sweet, and simple. Tea cakes were the cookies your grandma made when sugar was scarce and love had to stretch. Just flour, butter, a little sugar, and maybe some nutmeg if you had it, pressed flat by hand, baked golden, and cooled right on the windowsill. These weren't store-bought sweets. They were passed down in stained recipe cards and memory. In Mississippi kitchens during the civil rights years, tea cakes showed up after meetings, in lunch sacks, and on church steps. Mothers would wrap them in wax paper and tuck them into coat pockets, a soft reminder that somebody was waiting for you to come home safe. In 1963, after the Birmingham church bombing that took the lives of 4 little girls, Miss Elsie baked batch after batch of tea cakes. She said, "My hands can't stop the hate, but they can hold the dough." Salmon croquettes. You'd find a can of salmon in just about every pantry back then. Cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with protein. Mash it up with breadcrumbs, onions, a little egg, and season it right. Then fry it in hot grease till it sizzled brown on both sides. That's a salmon croquette. They were humble, but they filled your plate and your spirit. In many homes, they showed up on Friday nights right after payday, or when money ran low, but pride stayed high. Folks dressed them up with mustard, hot sauce, or a slice of tomato if you had one. When the Montgomery bus boycott dragged into its second year, salmon croquettes became the meal that kept folks going. Churches handed out lunch sacks to folks walking to work, and often inside was a croquette still warm from a sister's skillet. It wasn't just a meal, it was a message. We got you. Virginia peanut stew. Peanut stew came from deep roots. Africa to the south, pot to the soul, made with ground peanuts, onions, maybe tomatoes, and a touch of spice. It simmered into something thick, rich, and healing. Folks in Virginia swore by it on cold nights or long days when bellies groaned and spirits sagged. This wasn't your average stew. It wrapped you up like a wool coat and whispered, "You going to be all right." Elders said it kept blood strong and bones steady. And during the civil rights years, it fed more than hunger. It fed courage. Protesters spooned it down before marches, its warmth rising all the way to their fists. Spoon bread. Spoon bread wasn't bread like most folks think. It was soft, like pudding almost, made from cornmeal, milk, eggs, and butter. You had to scoop it with a spoon, hot and fluffy right out the oven. Sweet or savory, it slid across the plate like a warm blessing. Down in North Carolina, spoon bread was a staple at meetings, funerals, and freedom rallies alike. It didn't matter how loud the world got. One bite of that creamy cornmeal hush, and you remembered where you came from. Folks would pass it around in cast-iron dishes, each dip into the pan, bringing folks closer. During the sit-ins in Greensboro, mothers packed spoon bread into jars and carried it to the jailhouse. It would be cold by the time it got there, but even cold, it stuck to your ribs and made you feel loved. Even kids called it church cloud 'cause it was soft like heaven and always showed up when the choir sang loud and the prayers ran deep. And when you saw that golden top crack under your spoon, it felt like hope breaking through, soft, warm, and ready to rise again. Callous. Early in the morning down in New Orleans, the Callous women would walk the streets with baskets on their heads, calling out, "Callous, bells, Callous." These were sweet rice fritters, leftover rice, a little flour, eggs, sugar, and spice, fried, golden, and dusted with powdered sugar. They weren't just breakfast, they were memory, sold by black women long before the civil rights movement. Callous kept the spirit of freedom alive through taste and hustle. They helped feed families, paid rent, and reminded folks that survival could be sweet too. When segregation kept folks from the front of the bakery, these women brought the bakery to the people. You'd hear their voices before sunrise, echoing through narrow streets. And by the time the sun peeked over the bayou, the smell of fried rice and sugar filled the air. And in the 60s, when marches passed through New Orleans, old-timers still made Callous to hand out in brown paper bags. Pepper pot women's cassava dumplings. They called them freedom dumplings in some corners. Thick, chewy cassava dumplings dropped straight into bubbling pepper pot stew. These weren't delicate. They were heavy, filling, and meant to last. Made from grated cassava, salt, and a woman's knowing hand, they soaked up every drop of broth like a sponge for struggle and strength. In Philly, the pepper pot women, street vendors and home cooks alike, handed out bowls for pennies or for nothing at all if you couldn't pay. Their dumplings stuck to your bones, gave you the energy to keep moving, and the comfort to know someone cared. Pan-toted service pan hash. This was the kind of meal built from scraps. Yesterday's meat, leftover rice or grits, maybe a spoon of beans, all fried up together in a dented tin pan. Folks called it service pan hash 'cause it was carried to the fields, the factories, and the protests in pans wrapped in cloth or tucked under arms. In the Jim Crow South, where black folks couldn't sit at no lunch counter, this was how we fed ourselves. Women would tote these pans to factory gates or church steps, lifting the lids to share with anyone who needed it. The smell alone, spicy, smoky, honest, would make your stomach call out like a choir. During the marches in Selma, when bodies were tired and feet were blistered, pan-toted hash showed up like an old friend. Shared from one lap to another, it gave just enough strength to stand back up. Butler ham jowl stew. Ham jowls ain't just scraps. They're the secret meat hidden under the cheek, rich with fat and flavor. When simmered slow in a stew with onions, peppers, and maybe some okra or greens, they turned tender as a lullaby. Folks called it Butler when it was seasoned real fine and cooked long with love. This dish was Sunday special in many homes, especially when money was low, but spirits were high. The meat clung to the bone just right, and when it hit your tongue, it tasted like home. Black families passed down the method, quiet and proud, knowing jowls fed both stomach and story. Fried frog legs or crawfish patties. Now, this one came straight from the swamps and bayous where folks knew how to pull a meal from the mud. Frog legs were cleaned, seasoned, and fried till crispy like chicken wings. Crawfish got chopped, mixed with cornmeal and spices, then pan-fried into patties that sizzled like summer. Down in Louisiana and parts of Mississippi, these weren't strange foods. They were everyday blessings. Folks fished them out at dawn, caught by hand or net, and cooked them up by noon. Some say the best ones came from church fish fries, where the line wrapped around the block and the grease never stopped popping. In 1965, after the march from Selma to Montgomery, a small church just outside Baton Rouge hosted a homecoming meal. They had no money for beef or pork, so they brought in what they could catch: frog legs and crawfish, and the people ate like kings. Not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. And when that first bite hit, juicy, spiced, and wild, it told you something plain. We might not have much, but what we got we make beautiful. Coming up, liquid medicine that healed souls. Boiled peanuts or collared pot liquor blend. Boiled peanuts were the snack of the South. Soaked in salt water and boiled till soft, almost creamy inside. And pot liquor, that was the deep green broth left behind after cooking down collard greens, thick with nutrients, memory, and soul. Poor folks didn't waste nothing. They'd take the pot liquor, pour it into mugs, and sip it slow, hot, salty, and healing. Mix that with a handful of warm boiled peanuts, and you had a medicine stronger than any pill. Elders swore it cured colds, heartaches, and heavy days. In Albany, Georgia, during voter registration drives, neighbors handed out jars of pot liquor to tired organizers. It was cheap, yes, but rich in every way that counted. It gave energy to feet worn from knocking on doors and peace to minds weighed down by hate. And when someone passed you a bowl, they weren't just feeding your body. They were saying, "You belong here, you matter, and we'll get through this together." Some folks even crumbled cornbread right into that pot liquor, soaking it up like a sponge. That last spoonful, it felt like a hug from your grandma. Warm, strong, and just what you needed to carry on. Next, pepper pot that carried island heritage. Gulla Sea Island pepper pot. This wasn't your everyday stew. Gulla pepper pot came from the Sea Islands, simmered slow with okra, tomatoes, seafood, and garden herbs. It was thick, spicy, and bold, like the language and spirit of the Gulla people themselves. You could smell it cooking before you even got to the porch. Back in the day, this pot fed whole families after long days in the fields. Folks would toss in shrimp, crab, sometimes fish heads. Whatever the tide gave them, okra thickened it up. Tomatoes gave it tang and that broth. It clung to your spoon like history hanging on. During the Civil Rights Movement, when organizers came through the coastal Lowcountry, Gulla elders made pepper pot for them. They called it Freedom Stew, something sacred you only serve to the brave. It kept bellies full and spirits lit like a lantern in the dark, and each spoonful held the rhythm of the islands, strong, steady, and rooted deep. It reminded folks where they came from and gave them the fire to keep marching toward where they were going. Coming to the finish, drinks that carried ancient wisdom. Field Greens, Sorrel herbal drink. Before sodas and sweet tea filled up tables, folks quenched their thirst with what the land gave them. Sorrel, bright red hibiscus petals, got steeped with ginger and clove, sweetened with molasses or honey, and served cold in tin cups, sometimes mixed with foraged field greens like dandelion or sassafras. It wasn't just a drink, it was a tonic. In Mississippi and Alabama, this herbal brew was sipped on porches and packed into jars for long train rides to rallies. It cooled the body after hot days in the sun, calmed nerves before facing police lines, and reminded people of the old ways that kept them strong. One elder called it marching juice. Said, when the world got heavy, a swig of that sorrel would clear your head and put strength back in your legs. It wasn't sweet like store-bought drinks. It was bold, earthy, and honest. And every time it hit your tongue, it reminded you the roots we drink from run deep, and they carry everything we've been through, bitter, sweet, and everything in between. The art of making proper sorrel drink began with understanding seasons and timing. Hibiscus flowers had to be picked at just the right moment, when petals held their deepest crimson, but before the sun had beaten out their essential oils. Early morning gathering, when dew still clung to leaves and the world felt fresh with possibility, yielded the most potent flowers. Experienced hands could judge ripeness with a glance, selecting only those blooms that promised maximum flavor and healing power. Preparation was ceremony as much as cooking. Clay pots or glass jars worked best. Metal changed the taste, added bitter notes that competed with the intended tartness. Water had to be just shy of boiling when poured over the petals, hot enough to extract color and compounds, but not so hot that it destroyed delicate nutrients. The steeping process required patience, time for the liquid to transform from clear to ruby red, from plain to powerful. Ginger root got grated fresh, releasing oils that made tongues tingle and sinuses clear. Too much, and the drink became fire. Too little, and it lost its ability to settle stomachs and calm nerves. Clove buds contributed warmth and antiseptic properties, their numbing quality useful for sore throats that came from too much singing, too much shouting, too much speaking truth to power in voices that refused to be silenced. Field greens added complexity that store-bought herbs couldn't match. Dandelion leaves, picked young before bitterness became overwhelming, contributed liver-cleansing properties that helped bodies process stress and fatigue. Sassafras root, carefully harvested and properly prepared, provided distinctive flavor and blood-purifying qualities that folk medicine had relied on for generations. The sweetening required careful balance. Molasses brought iron along with sweetness, helping rebuild blood depleted by poor nutrition and constant stress. Honey offered quick energy and antimicrobial properties, but had to be added after cooling to preserve beneficial enzymes. Sugarcane syrup, when available, provided complex sweetness that complemented rather than masked the drink's natural tartness. Straining separated liquid from solids, but many families saved the spent petals and herbs for second steeping, understanding that waste meant want, and every bit of healing power needed to be extracted. The resulting concentrate could be diluted with cold water for daily drinking or consumed straight for medicinal purposes when someone felt poorly or needed extra strength for difficult days ahead. Storage in cool, dark places kept the drink fresh for days, though most batches disappeared quickly as family members and neighbors discovered the refreshing relief it provided. Glass jars with tight lids traveled well, making this the perfect beverage for long bus rides to demonstrations, for sharing during voter registration drives, for offering to anyone whose throat had grown hoarse from freedom songs. Children learned to appreciate the complex flavor profile, understanding that good medicine rarely tasted like candy. The initial tartness gave way to subtle sweetness, while ginger provided warmth that spread through chest and limbs. Clove left tongue-tingling sensations that reminded drinkers they'd consumed something powerful, something that would work on their behalf long after the last drop disappeared. Church picnics featured large containers of sorrel drink alongside more familiar beverages, introducing community members to traditional preparations they might have forgotten or never learned. Elderly women demonstrated proper techniques while sharing stories about great-grandmothers who had treated everything from headaches to heartbreak with carefully prepared herbal remedies that cost nothing but knowledge and attention. The drink became symbol of self-sufficiency, proving that health comes in many forms, sometimes expensive prescriptions from distant pharmacies, sometimes free plants growing wild in fields that belong to everyone willing to learn which ones to pick, how to prepare them, when to drink them for maximum benefit that flows through veins like liquid liberty, carrying healing power to every cell that needs restoration, that flows through veins like liquid liberty, carrying healing power to every cell that needs restoration. Train platforms and bus stations witnessed countless jars being passed between travelers, shared sips creating temporary bonds between strangers, united by common destination and common purpose. The ruby liquid caught sunlight streaming through windows, creating brief moments of beauty in spaces designed for function rather than aesthetics, reminding everyone that even the simplest pleasures could transform ordinary journeys into sacred pilgrimages. Hospital waiting rooms and jail visiting areas heard the quiet pop of jar lids being opened, the gentle gurgle of liquid being poured into small cups, the whispered conversations about ingredients and proportions that kept traditional knowledge alive in spaces where traditional healing was often forgotten or dismissed as superstition rather than recognized as wisdom accumulated over generations of necessity and care. Next, pancakes that carried plantation memories forward. Hoe cakes. What pancakes carry plantation memories? Cast iron griddles heated over open flames, while cornmeal mixed with just enough water to bind dreams with determination. Cornmeal, water, salt, grease, history, hunger, hope, hands. No eggs, no milk, no sugar, just basics that transformed under pressure into golden rounds that filled stomachs and satisfied souls with every bite that tasted like resilience itself. These cakes fed field workers before they fed freedom fighters. Pre-dawn darkness, cotton fields across Georgia, 1961. Workers grabbed hoe cakes from cloth bundles, eating breakfast while walking toward another day that would break backs, but never spirits. The simple pancakes provided portable energy that sustained bodies through labor designed to crush dignity, yet somehow dignity survived disguised as cornmeal and determination. When you ain't got much, you make much of what you got. Sister Ophelia, who'd been making hoe cakes since childhood during sharecropping days, understood that these weren't just pancakes. They were portable pride. You can eat these standing up, walking fast, or sitting still. They travel good because they made from travel people. The art of hoe cake making lived in the hands more than the head. Too much water and they'd fall apart on the griddle. Too little and they'd crack like drought-stricken earth. But when the mixture felt right, thick enough to hold, thin enough to spread, those golden rounds emerged like edible suns that could warm you from the inside out. Plantation kitchens had given birth to these humble cakes out of necessity. When enslaved cooks needed to feed field hands before dawn broke, hoe cakes provided portable sustenance that could be eaten without stopping work. The name itself told the story. Cooked on the flat blade of a hoe when proper cooking surfaces weren't available. But what started as survival food became something more precious, a connection to ancestors who'd learned to make beauty from brutality. During sharecropping days, families would gather around cast-iron griddles placed directly over open fires, the flames licking the bottom while corn batter sizzled and popped. Children learned to flip hoe cakes with steady hands, understanding that patience and timing couldn't be rushed. Each golden round taught lessons about waiting, about trusting the process, about understanding that some things reveal their worth slowly. The texture set hoe cakes apart from their fancier cousins, dense but not heavy, with a slight grittiness from the cornmeal that reminded your teeth they were eating something real, something substantial. No fluffy lightness here. These cakes had weight, had presence, had the kind of substance that could anchor you through whatever storm was coming. Church fellowship breakfasts featured hoe cakes that reminded taste buds about beginnings, about foundations, about the kind of food that built strength for the long journey toward justice still ahead. Elderly hands still moved with muscle memory, pouring batter in perfect circles while sharing stories about harder times when hoe cakes might be the only hot food a family family saw all day. Young civil rights workers learned to appreciate these simple cakes during long organizing drives through rural communities. When fancy restaurants wouldn't serve them and hotel kitchens stayed closed, hoe cakes appeared on back porches and in church basements, offered by hands that understood hunger and hearts that understood struggle. These weren't charity, they were communion. The portability that made hoe cakes practical for field work served the movement just as well. Wrapped in clean cloth, they traveled to voter registration drives, to protest planning meetings, to jail visits where families tried to slip nourishment through barred windows. Each cake carried more than calories. It carried the message that someone, somewhere, was thinking about your empty stomach and your tired soul. In cramped apartments where activists slept on floors between campaigns, hoe cakes cooked on hot plates became midnight comfort food. Steam rose from simple batter while strategy sessions continued around kitchen tables, plans for tomorrow's march getting sketched between bites of warm cornmeal that tasted like home even when home felt very far away. Sweet potato pone. What dessert disguised itself as medicine? Grated sweet potatoes surrendered their orange flesh while molasses whispered secrets to eggs and spices. Sweet potatoes, molasses, eggs, nutmeg, cinnamon, butter, milk, love, healing, home. Cast iron pans cradled pudding cake combinations that satisfied dessert cravings while delivering nutrition that bodies craved during seasons when both sugar and strength ran scarce. This pone powered protesters through their sweetest victories. Church fellowship halls, Albany, Georgia, 1962. After long days registering voters who'd never been allowed to dream of political participation, families gathered around tables where sweet potato pone appeared like edible encouragement. The complex, comforting sweetness reminded taste buds that some victories come covered in molasses, require patience to appreciate, satisfy deeply rather than quickly. Sweet potatoes know how to hold on to hope even when buried underground. Miss Lucille, whose sweet potato pone recipe had fed 5 generations, understood that this dish was medicine disguised as dessert. Sweet potatoes got everything your blood needs: sugar for energy, vitamins for strength, love for everything else that matters. The pone became staple at freedom meetings because it provided sustainable energy that kept conversations focused, spirits lifted, and stomachs satisfied through discussions that lasted past midnight. The preparation ritual connected families to agricultural wisdom that stretched back generations. Sweet potatoes had to be selected carefully, firm but yielding, with skins that spoke of proper curing and storage. Too young and they'd be starchy, lacking the deep sweetness that transformed ordinary ingredients into extraordinary comfort. Too old and they'd be stringy, fighting against the grater instead of surrendering their flesh willingly. Grating sweet potatoes by hand was meditation disguised as kitchen work. The rhythm of knuckles against metal, the pile of orange shreds growing slowly, the sweet earth smell that rose with each stroke, it created space for thinking, for remembering, for connecting to mothers and grandmothers who'd performed this same ritual through decades of change and challenge. Miss Lucille's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she demonstrated the technique to wide-eyed granddaughters. "You got to respect the potato," she'd say, while showing how to avoid the grater's teeth, while still getting every bit of flesh. "It been growing in the dark all season, storing up sweetness for when we need it most. Don't waste none of that gift." The molasses that bound everything together carried its own history of struggle and transformation. Made from sugar cane that grew under brutal labor conditions, molasses represented the bitter and sweet intertwined, how beauty could emerge from suffering, how darkness could nurture light, how the most intense flavors often came from the most challenging circumstances. Eggs beaten into the mixture by hand created the custard-like texture that set sweet potato pone apart from simpler preparations. The beating required patience and rhythm, another meditation that gave families time to talk while their hands stayed busy. Stories got shared over egg beating. Wisdom passed down between generations while foam slowly built and arms grew tired from the constant motion. Spices arrived carefully measured but generously applied. Nutmeg grated fresh-released oils that spoke of distant shores and trade routes, while cinnamon bark contributed warmth that complemented rather than competed with the sweet potato's natural earthiness. These weren't luxury ingredients. They were necessities that transformed simple food into something that satisfied souls alongside stomachs. The baking process filled entire houses with promise. Cast-iron pans heated evenly, creating crusts that protected creamy interiors while developing flavors that couldn't be rushed. Families learned to read the signs. When the edges pulled slightly away from pan sides, when the center barely jiggled when shaken gently. When the kitchen filled with that deep, complex aroma that meant medicine was ready. Cooling required discipline. Hot pone would fall apart if cut too soon, but warm pone delivered maximum comfort to hearts that needed healing. The texture walked the line between pudding and cake, dense enough to satisfy, but light enough to disappear on tongues that had grown accustomed to making small portions last long times. Freedom meetings often concluded with sweet potato pone passed around in careful slices, each person receiving just enough to remember that sweetness still existed in a world that served mostly bitterness. The shared dessert created moments of quiet communion, forks scraping plates, while minds processed the evening's discussions and hearts prepared for tomorrow's challenges. Smoked mullet with grits. What fish refused to be ignored? Smokehouses filled with mullet caught from waters that belonged to everyone, while grits bubbled white and creamy, like hope rising from corn ground fine. Mullet fish, salt, hickory smoke, stone-ground grits, butter, pepper, pride, persistence. The oily, rich fish paired perfectly with bland, comforting grits, creating combinations that satisfied hunger while teaching lessons about balance, contrast, and the beauty of opposites dancing together. Coastal communities served this when inland communities couldn't. Sea Island Kitchens, South Carolina, 1963. While lunch counters remained segregated, fishing waters stayed free, providing protein to families who knew how to cast nets, cure fish, and create meals that restaurants couldn't replicate because restaurants don't serve traditions older than America itself. Steam rose from grits while smoke rose from fish, creating atmosphere thick with satisfaction. Ocean don't care about skin color. It feed anybody willing to get their feet wet. Brother Samuel, who'd been smoking mullet for 40 years, understood that this meal was independence disguised as breakfast. Can't nobody stop you from fishing. Water belonged to everybody. Smoke belonged to anybody. Grits grow anywhere you got corn. The combination became symbol of self-sufficiency, proving that freedom has many flavors, but always tastes like the refusal to depend on systems designed to limit options. The art of smoking mullet began before dawn, when tides and timing aligned to create perfect conditions. Mullet ran in schools so thick you could almost walk across their backs, but catching them required knowledge passed down through generations who understood water, weather, and the rhythms that governed both. Cast nets flew in perfect circles, landing on water with whispered prayers that today's catch would feed today's needs. Cleaning mullet was surgery performed with respect. These weren't pretty fish. Their silver scales and strong flavor made them unwelcome on fancy tables. But families who understood real wealth knew that mullet carried more nutrition per pound than most fish that commanded higher prices. The oily flesh that others rejected became liquid gold when properly smoked, developing complex flavors that married perfectly with simple accompaniments. Smokehouse construction was community effort. Men would gather to build structures that could serve multiple families, sharing both labor and expertise about proper ventilation, wood selection, and temperature control. The buildings themselves became neighborhood landmarks, places where knowledge got shared alongside fish, where children learned patience while adults tended fires that couldn't be hurried. Hickory wood provided the signature flavor that separated true smoked mullet from inferior imitations. Green wood created too much moisture, while seasoned wood burned too fast and hot. The perfect balance required understanding that developed over decades, wisdom that couldn't be bought in stores but had to be earned through trial and error, success and failure, patience and persistence. The smoking process demanded attention without interference. Fires needed tending but not constant poking. Fish needed monitoring but not constant turning. Temperature had to stay consistent without becoming obsessive. Master smokers developed almost mystical relationships with their fires, able to read subtle signs in smoke color and fish texture that told stories about readiness invisible to untrained eyes. Grits preparation ran parallel to fish smoking, both processes requiring time and attention that couldn't be rushed. Stone-ground corn produced grits with texture and flavor that instant versions couldn't match. Coarse enough to provide substance, fine enough to cook evenly, with corn flavor that complemented rather than competed with the fish's intensity. The key to perfect grits lay in the liquid ratio and stirring technique. Too much water created soup. Too little created lumps that no amount of stirring could smooth. But when proportions aligned and patient hands kept spoons moving in steady circles, magic happened. Individual corn particles surrendered their starch to create creamy unity that provided perfect canvas for bold flavors. Families who couldn't afford restaurant meals still ate like royalty when they understood how to harvest water's bounty and transform corn into comfort. Church fish fries featured smoked mullet alongside more popular selections, but connoisseurs sought these intensely flavored fish because they represented connection to waters, to traditions, to knowledge that couldn't be purchased in stores but could be passed between generations who understood that the best things often come from the most challenging sources. The smoky, complex flavor cut through creamy grits like truth cuts through lies. Boldly, necessarily, creating contrast that highlighted both elements perfectly. Each bite delivered omega oils that strengthened minds for strategic thinking, proteins that sustained bodies for physical resistance, and flavors that reminded taste buds about abundance available to those who know where to look and how to work for what they need. Morning meals of smoked mullet and grits became communion between past and present, between African fishing traditions and American agricultural abundance, between individual struggle and community support. Steam rose from breakfast plates, while plans rose in minds that understood how proper nourishment enables sustained resistance, how taking care of bodies enables taking care of souls, how feeding families enables feeding movements that change the world one meal at a time. Salt-rising bread. What bread defied every expectation? Cornmeal starters bubbled without yeast, while flour waited patiently for magic that science couldn't explain, but grandmothers understood perfectly. Cornmeal, flour, salt, milk, sugar, bacterial culture, mystery, time, faith, knowledge. The unusual fermentation process created bread with distinctive flavor and texture that satisfied hunger while challenging assumptions about how beautiful things should work. This bread proved that alternative methods could create beautiful results. Kitchen counters across rural Alabama, 1964. While store-bought yeast became expensive luxury, families turned to older knowledge about bread making that depended on natural fermentation processes that captured wild bacteria from environment rather than purchased packets from companies that might not serve everyone equally. Some breads rise because you tell them to. This bread rise because it want to. Sister Mattie, who'd learned salt-rising technique from her Cherokee grandmother, understood that this bread was metaphor disguised as meal. You can't force this bread. You got to trust the process, trust the bacteria, trust that good things come to those who wait properly. The bread became symbol of alternative pathways, proving that when conventional routes become blocked or expensive, knowledge about different methods enables continued progress toward desired destinations. Freedom meetings often featured salt-rising bread because it represented the movement itself, achieving beautiful results through unconventional methods, depending on community knowledge rather than commercial products. Trusting processes that looked different but produced outcomes that satisfied hungry souls seeking both nourishment and change. The complex, cheese-like flavor surprised tongues accustomed to standard bread, teaching taste buds about diversity within familiar categories. Each slice demonstrated that traditional methods often produce superior results, that patience creates better outcomes than shortcuts, that understanding natural processes connects cooks to knowledge deeper than recipes written in books, but recorded in hearts that remember when hands had to make everything from scratch. Church fellowship halls filled with salt-rising bread aroma, while committees planned protests between servings. The unusual bread created conversations about patience, about faith, about trusting processes that look different from what you expect, but deliver results that satisfy both body and soul when you give them time to work their mysterious magic. Final dish. The ultimate comfort that carried communities forward. Crackling bread. What bread carried the final gift? Cracklings, crispy pieces of rendered pork fat, mixed into cornbread batter while cast-iron skillets heated over flames that would transform simple ingredients into complex satisfaction. Cornmeal, cracklings, buttermilk, eggs, salt, baking soda, love, tradition, community, completion. The rich, savory addition elevated basic cornbread into celebration food that marked special occasions and satisfied deepest hunger with profound contentment. This bread appeared when families celebrated abundance or shared scarcity. Sunday dinners and emergency meals, Georgia Kitchens, 1965. Crackling bread showed up at church suppers when hog-killing time provided abundance, and at crisis meals when families rendered every scrap of fat to create sustenance that would last through uncertain seasons ahead. Steam rose from golden rounds, while gratitude rose from hearts that understood how to honor every gift. Waste not, and want for nothing, when you know how to use everything. Brother Thomas, who'd been making crackling bread since childhood during lean Depression years, understood that this dish was celebration disguised as necessity. Cracklings mean somebody cared enough to save them. This bread tell you that nothing get wasted, everything get honored. The bread connected families to farming traditions where every part of every animal got utilized because respect meant using everything, because gratitude meant wasting nothing, because understanding meant recognizing that abundance often comes disguised as ordinary ingredients that become extraordinary when combined with proper knowledge and genuine appreciation. Church fellowship halls filled with crackling bread aroma while committees celebrated victories between servings. The rich, satisfying bread created atmosphere where success could be digested alongside flavors that reminded everyone where they came from, what they'd survived, and how far they'd traveled on this long journey toward justice. Children learned about transformation from crackling bread, discovering how scraps become treasures when hands understand their worth, how community celebrations taste better when everyone contributes what they can, how the best endings often come from honoring every part of the journey that brought you home. Steam rose from golden rounds, while pride rose in hearts that understood the sacred circle of giving and receiving, of taking what seems small and making it magnificent through love, patience, and the kind of wisdom that gets passed down in cast-iron skillets from grandmother to granddaughter, generation after generation. The bread taught final lessons about abundance, how it doesn't always look like overflowing tables, how sometimes it looks like making sure nothing goes to waste, how the richest meals often come from the humblest ingredients when stirred with the greatest love. Every bite carried forward the understanding that community wealth gets measured not in what you can afford to throw away, but in what you're wise enough to save, season, and share with those who need it most. When the last crumb disappeared and the final skillet got scraped clean, folks would sit back with the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've honored every gift, wasted nothing precious, and fed everyone who came hungry to your table. That's the kind of abundance that lasts, that builds, that carries forward into tomorrow with the promise that there will always be enough when love does the cooking and gratitude does the seasoning. Now you've tasted a piece of our past, not just in food, but in fire, in family, in fight. These 30 forgotten soul foods didn't just fill stomachs, they fueled a movement. They were passed from hand to hand, cooked over protest fires, served after marches, and remembered in silence when words fell short. Every bite told a story of mothers who stirred hope into pots, of fathers who fried courage in cast iron, of children who sipped strength from soup bowls. But these recipes didn't end when the movement achieved its victories. They lived on. Today, somewhere in America, a grandmother is teaching her granddaughter how to season pot liquor just right. A church kitchen is filling with the aroma of salmon croquettes, frying golden brown. A family is gathering around a table where crackling bread reminds everyone that nothing gets wasted when love does the cooking. These foods didn't just sustain bodies during the struggle, they preserved culture through change. They carried forward the hands that made them, the hearts that shared them, the hope that sustained them. From pepper pot soup's fierce courage to crackling bread's abundant gratitude, these recipes wrote themselves into history not as footnotes, but as foundations. Every dish was a quiet act of rebellion. Every shared meal was a declaration of dignity. Every kitchen that bubbled with these aromas was a sanctuary where souls got fed alongside bodies, where strategy got planned between spoonfuls, where the next generation learned that survival tastes like whatever you make it, tastes like when your hands know how to turn nothing into something, scarcity into abundance, struggle into strength. The recipes traveled in memory when they couldn't travel in books. They survived in whispered instructions passed down in church basements and back porch conversations. They lived in the muscle memory of hands that knew exactly how much salt, how much time, how much love each dish required to become not just food, but medicine for hungry hearts and fuel for tired souls. These weren't just meals. They were mobile sanctuaries, portable prayers, edible evidence that creativity conquers circumstances every single time. They proved that dignity doesn't depend on expensive ingredients, that abundance doesn't require wealth, that the most important recipes get written not in cookbooks, but in the hearts of people who understand that feeding someone is one of the holiest acts humans can perform. So, if these dishes stirred something in you, a memory, a hunger, a pride, don't let them fade again. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that their ancestors were alchemists who transformed scraps into gold, poverty into power, pain into nourishment that sustained souls through the darkest seasons and the brightest victories. Cook these recipes. Teach them to young hands that need to know where they came from. Pass them down like the precious inheritance they are. Keep the taste of our history alive on your tongue, in your kitchen, around your table where everyone is welcome and everyone gets fed. And if you want to go deeper into the flavors that shaped America, hit that subscribe button. There's a whole table of stories still waiting to be served, one dish at a time, one family at a time, one generation at a time. Because the revolution may have changed the laws, but the love that fed it lives on in every pot that bubbles, every skillet that sizzles, every table that welcomes all who are hungry for something more than food. These recipes are still being written every time someone makes pepper pot soup from memory, every time a family gathers around service pan hash, every time an elder shows young hands how to wrap ash cake in collard leaves. The story continues, the struggle continues, the love continues, and the taste of freedom, seasoned with memory and served with hope, continues to nourish souls who understand that some hungers run deeper than the stomach, and some recipes feed more than the body. That's the true power of these forgotten foods. They remind us that we've survived everything history threw at us, and we did it with dignity, creativity, and the kind of love that turns even the humblest ingredients into feasts fit for kings. We seasoned our struggles, we stirred our hopes, we served our strength, and we're still here, still cooking, still sharing, still feeding anyone who comes to our table hungry for the taste of freedom.